Good afternoon and welcome to Freedom Watch, a daily dose of raw liberty, streaming online on foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of its Constitution. From California to Connecticut, frustrated Americans are voicing their anger at town halls and tea parties like we've never seen before. Their anger is directed at lawmakers, like, for example, Senator Christopher Dodd of Connecticut, who go to Washington, no longer represent their constituencies, and abuse their power. Senator Dodd, in office for nearly 30 years, sits on the powerful Senate Banking Committee, where he has used his own influence to secure a personal sweetheart mortgage deal in 2003. Senator Dodd has some opposition. Joining me now is Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital, and now, I can finally say it, an official candidate for the seat of the United States Senate in the great state of Connecticut. Welcome here, Peter. Is it official? Have you announced that you are a candidate for the Republican nomination for Senate?
Yes, I made that official announcement yesterday. I did it in an email to some of the people who had already donated to my campaign at schiffforsenate.com.
Why the Republican Party?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly at home in the Republican Party, at least in principle, in philosophy. You know, the Republicans are supposed to be the party that represents shrinking government.
Supposed to be.
Well, I say supposed to because that's all they do is talk about shrinking government. What makes me different is that I actually want to do it. I don't just want to talk about it. And hopefully the voters of Connecticut will understand the difference between a politician who's just, pandering to the Republicans to get elected. But the minute they get elected, all they care about is staying in office and growing their power and growing government. And someone like myself, who doesn't want to be in government, who's in the private sector, and who's interrupting his career in order to go to Washington and clean up this mess.
All right. Chris Dodd is obviously part of the big government mentality in Washington, D.C. He's obviously been part of the establishment for a long time. But what is the case against him in the state of Connecticut? Let's assume you get the Republican nomination. You no doubt will. What's the case you will make against him in the general election in November of 2010?
Well, first of all, it's not going to be easy to get the Republican nomination.
But you're running against some wrestler?
Well, Linda McMahon, she's not just some wrestler. She's got a lot of money that she's made in wrestling, and she's going to spend tens of millions of it on this campaign. There's another well-funded contender. There's the front runner who in the polls right now is beating everybody by a wide margin, who's been a congressman for 3 or 4 years. So the real battle, as far as I'm concerned, is getting the Republican nomination. I think it'll be easier to defeat Chris Dodd. The key is, to win in the Republican primary.
Well, will the Republicans against whom you're running make the shrink the government, stay within the confines of the Constitution, economics 101 argument that you will make, or will they be George Bush-style Republicans?
Well, I think they're going to try to make that kind of argument, but it's not going to be sincere, and they're not really going to know how to do it, and I don't think it's going to be believable. Certainly for a guy like Simmons to try to make those arguments when he already had 6 years in Congress,
right,
when he voted for things probably like the Patriot Act and the prescription drug bill and all the big deficit spending of George Bush, to say that now I've had a change of heart, I've seen the error of my ways, I don't think he's going to do that.
So how do you appeal to what is probably a moderate Republican Party, we're not talking about the Republican Party of Texas, in a northeastern state that hasn't had a Republican represented since Lowell Weicker, who was never a real Republican at all? How do you appeal to those people? What instincts in them do you pursue for your small government, follow the Constitution, free market campaign?
I mean, I have to appeal, to their reason, to their intellect, to get them to understand, what's happened in this country and the real problems that we face, and get them to understand that the source of these problems is not the market, but the government. And the government is not the solution. And the thing is that I'm the only person running who can point to a history of understanding what was going to happen, because I forecast all these things. When everybody else was making fun of me or laughing at me, I laid out in no uncertain terms exactly what was going to happen. And the reason I knew that is because I understood the consequences of the government interference in the market. I understood the phony economy. I understood the bubble. I knew how it was going to burst. I knew what was going to happen when it did. And I knew all the things the government would do to try to solve the problem and how that would all make it worse. And hopefully I can appeal to voters on that level, and I can appeal to their frustration at trying to be told that their prosperity is a function of bailing out Wall Street, that they can only succeed if billions of dollars or trillions of dollars are transferred to investment bankers. How can that be something that is going to be sold to Connecticut by the Democrats when Dodd is trying to convince average Connecticut voters, middle-class American voters, that he represents their interest, yet he's stealing their money and giving it to Wall Street bankers.
All right, how is he stealing their money?
Well, he's taking it in the form of inflation. I mean, obviously, there's no major tax hikes that are coming, right? The politicians don't have the guts to raise taxes.
Right. Well, they wouldn't raise taxes now, 14 months in front of an election.
But they're creating money.
Right.
They're creating inflation. But they're running a massive deficit. When the government is running trillion-dollar deficits, that's higher taxes in the future or right now in terms of inflation, because the government creates money and spends it. Instead of taking it from us through taxes, they create it and spend it. That's why the dollar is hitting new lows. That's why prices are rising. And average Americans who Dodd claims to represent, when they go to the gas station and they're paying $4, $5, $6 a gallon for gas, maybe $10 a gallon one day or more, when they're going to the supermarket and they're paying unheard of prices for milk or eggs or bread, it's going to be because of the policies of a Chris Dodd.
Where do you stand on foreign affairs in general? My recollection is that you were not in favor of the Iraq war. For a variety of reasons, whether it's its lawfulness, its morality, its usefulness as an instrument of foreign policy. But just today, the President of the United States announced that a missile shield that the Bush administration had offered to construct, which would have saved or protected or insulated Eastern Europe from the excesses of Russia, and would also have interfered with the ability of Iran to shoot missiles across that part of Europe, whether they were aimed at New York or aimed elsewhere, would not be built. That he thinks that he can tame Iran by his good graces and ability to negotiate. Where are you on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the primary function of the federal government is national defense. So to the extent that the government is spending any money at all, that's where we should spend it. Now, that doesn't mean we should waste it on programs that aren't necessary or that on wars that are of aggression, but we need a national defense. Unfortunately, the government is spending so much money on other things, we can't afford. We're broke. We are borrowing all the money to pay for our defense from our theoretical enemies. I mean, we're borrowing the money from the Middle East. We're borrowing it from China. We're borrowing it from Japan. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. So we can't have a national defense until we restore our financials at home, until we bring the budget into surplus and cut back all the other things the government is doing that have nothing to do with defense and they're not authorized by the Constitution.
Why do you think that President Obama announced an intention to reappoint Ben Bernanke as chairman of the Federal Reserve?
Well, look, he's taken the easy way out. I mean, Ben Bernanke was appointed by Bush. If he doesn't reappoint him and appoints somebody else, and then things get bad, it's, well, you screwed up. You shouldn't have, you should have stayed with Ben Bernanke. If he stays with Ben Bernanke and things get bad, it's like, well, I mean, I didn't appoint the guy, and everybody told me I had to leave him there. It's Bush's fault. So I think he did the politically safe thing in reappointing Bernanke. But Bernanke is not doing a good job. He's doing a horrific job. He's doing, about as bad a job as you could do. I mean, maybe it's possible there's somebody who could do a worse job. I mean, I don't know for sure, but there might be.
What would it take for the American public or members of Congress to recognize the incredible financial destruction that the Federal Reserve has visited upon our lives and our fortunes since its inception in 1913? Or would you be the only member of the Senate and Ron Paul the only member of the House who would understand that?
Well, I think there are other members that could understand it. I mean, if it were explained to them in the proper fashion. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I really need to do when I go to Congress or the Senate is to educate everybody. And one of the first things I might do is take a copy of the Constitution and read it, because I don't think anybody, they all swear an oath to support it, but I don't know if anybody's ever read it. Oh. But I need to let people understand the real problem that this country faces. This is enormous problem. We are on the precipice of a major economic financial collapse. I mean, what we've just experienced, I mean, that's just the opening act. I mean, the real collapse is coming. And our politicians need to understand why the country is in this shape. It's because of them. It's because of the Federal Reserve and their policies, their regulations that have distorted the free market and that have created this mess. And that if they don't stop doing what they're doing, there's going to be no turning back.
Peter Schiff, thank you. You're always welcome here. You're welcome here throughout the campaign. You're welcome to bring your opponents here. I'll moderate the debate.
If they'll come.
Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Sure.